He didn't put a false facade on it. He didn't put a fake door at the beginning of the Christian life. Later on in that verse, it goes on to say, "But take heart, I have overcome the world." We're more than conquerors. But church, if you're more than a conqueror, it means that you have something that you actually have to conquer. Sometimes when you think your giant fighting days are over, they still come at you. David got famous for killing a giant, didn't he? If you were to go out to the streets of Farmington, Arkansas, and you were to ask, for what is David famous? Most people would say, he's the guy that killed Goliath. Even if you were speaking with a humanist, a rationalist, even an unbeliever in our town, you asked, who killed Goliath? Most people in our community would probably be able to say it was David. They may not know much else about what the scripture says, but they would say everybody knows that David killed Goliath. David got famous toward the beginning of his life for slaying a giant. But this is not at the beginning of his life, this text from which we're studying today. This is toward the end. He's not young, he's old. He's not resilient. He can't bounce back like he used to. In fact, what caught my attention about this passage first was that it says that David grew faint. That's interesting to me. You can read all about his life, and that's a shock, a surprise, an astonishment, but you don't expect to hear that this charismatic, gifted giant killer would grow weary in his older age. But this isn't the beginning of his life, it's toward the end of his life. At the beginning, he could bounce back, but he thought his giant killing days were over by then. Now, if you know anything about the story of David, you would understand why he's probably pretty tired toward the end of his life. Think about his life's journey for a bit. First of all, he had vaulted into national fame when he was a very young man. He was the 8th son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, unknown country boy killing the national antagonist, and suddenly he's thrust into the national fame that he experienced, and that'll take it out of you just by itself, right? But then he had to deal with Psycho Saul. You remember Psycho Saul in the Bible? That's what I call him. Psycho Saul. You know, Saul is the definition of love-hate. He, on one hand, loved David. The next day, he hated him, and David was playing his harp. Psycho Saul loved him, and then all of a sudden, he tried to pin him to the wall with a javelin, if you remember that part of the story. And man, that'll wear you out in your life when you have somebody that is so up and down that they love you one minute and hate you the next. Then there's the time when David was 47 years of age, kind of at the peak of his life and the height of his power. This is the man who wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd." But he's also the one who stayed home when his soldiers went out to battle. And he looked down from his roof on Bathsheba and sends her a text message, basically. Happy hour at the palace, 5 p.m., dresses business casual, you know all that. He commits adultery and murder, covers it up at 47 years of age. Man, that'll take it out of you too, right? But that's just the beginning of the giants in David's life. Then his own son Absalom turns against him, and his own general turns against him, and his family blows up on him. Now, do not raise your hand right now. Anybody in here ever had their family blow up on them? I've sat with too many of you in my study to hear stories going on in your family's life. Every family has stuff, man. By this time, David is tired, yet he faces not one, but 4 more giants in this story. He thought his giant fighting days were over. And I wonder if there is somebody here today that this doesn't have your thumbprint on this passage. If this were a picture frame, you could put your face inside the frame. You said, I thought my giant fighting days were over, but they still just keep coming at me. Am I preaching to anybody today? There's a word that happens over and over here. I don't know if you saw it. The word again happens again and again and again. Again appears again. And the word Philistines is another word that pops out a lot. It occurs 200 times in the book of 2 Samuel. And when you think about the pesky Iron Age people and you think that they're gone, they just keep coming back. You can't get rid of them. And David discovered as an old king that his giant fighting days were not over. In fact, 4 of them just came at him in a row. Wouldn't it be good in the Christian life if you just had one big battle and that was it? Wouldn't that be great? You know, out there somewhere it'll be like Moses crossing the Red Sea, and when the sea swallows up Pharaoh, it's all over and you can go on with your life. That would be nice. Or like the fire falling on the mountain at Mount Carmel when it ate up the sacrifices, just one big fire and then it's all gone. The giants are over with. I used to think life would be like writing one big check and it would all be over, but instead it's more like a few pennies here, a few pennies there. And a lifetime goes by of one giant after another. In an unguarded moment, I say an irate word, there's a giant. I get into battle with somebody from our staff or with someone out in the community, and boom, there's another giant. I start a fire trying to put out another fire, and then there's just one humongous fire. There's a giant. I make an unwise financial decision. There's another giant. See, sometimes we think the Christian life is like one big dramatic volcano where it blows up and then it's over, when really it's more like the Grand Canyon. Let me unpack that a little bit. The Kilauea volcano on Hawaii's Big Island recently erupted with lava fountains reaching over 1,000 feet high. This eruption, which began on May 25th, was the 23rd in a series of eruptions that began December of 2024. The eruption lasted for 6 hours, covered half of the crater floor with lava, but it was primarily just one big eruption. You may have seen it on the news. Fire, lava, looked pretty cool. Smoke, the island shook. Hundreds of houses then didn't think it looked so cool because they were destroyed. But 7 miles long, it was eaten away. You see, there's no guarantee in the Christian life that the giants stop coming. In fact, the greater Son of David, Jesus, told you the opposite. He said in John 16:33, in the world you will have what? Tribulation. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't put a false facade on it. He didn't put a fake door at the beginning of the Christian life. Later on in that verse, it goes on to say, "But take heart, I have overcome the world." That's why in Romans 8:37, the Apostle Paul invented a word in the Greek New Testament, hupernikomai. It means we're more than conquerors. But church, if you're more than a conqueror, it means that you have something that you actually have to conquer.